Hello, today I'd like to talk about the role of interactivity in horror games, and this is something I've touched on here and there, but I think the PT demo has really got me thinking more about this. Specifically, there were at least two articles by big gaming sites that wrote about how the PT demo by itself was a great piece of horror gaming. Completely putting aside the whole fact that it's just a teaser for another game. And even at the end it says, like, this is completely unrelated to the actual game. I can't remember the wording, but basically they're just saying this is just a joke, well, not a joke, but just a marketing thing and has no bearing on the actual Silent Hills game. But I think it's interesting to read people who had such a great impression of the game and think about it as a horror game in and of itself and the merits of it. And certainly I did a whole developer diary talking about it, but mostly I was, expressing my frustration with the game mechanics of it, of actually beating the game. But I think that there are some things that it did really well, and certainly if you get rid of the whole sort of end section that, as near as I can figure, no one to this date has actually figured out the true way to get the phone to ring and the game to advance. I mean, there's a lot of people with a lot of different theories. I think some are crazy, like you talking to the microphone and that somehow triggers, which would be a very Kojima sort of thing to do, breaking the fourth wall, of gaming or something. The game in and of itself, again, as I mentioned, the previous one has no real interaction other than you can zoom in on objects, and that allows you to pick up a flashlight, for example. And I guess you can pick up pieces of a photo, and in another fourth wall breaking thing. I think one of the photos is actually in the pause menu, which is really weird. I didn't get that one. The game, again, is mostly just walking. You can't really run, and looking around. And so I think, to some extent, it's like a haunted house simulator. In that, a haunted house, they can't really touch you, they can't really grab you. You just sort of experience the scares in the environment. And certainly I, enjoy haunted houses, and I've talked about those. But I think it's interesting to look at this as a style of horror gameplay. Certainly I talked about how puzzles are not. I don't really think puzzles are the greatest mechanic for a horror game, and obviously the end of the PT demo is a huge puzzle, but I think that the things that people like about the PT demo aren't the aspects of having to look at things, which in and of itself is not really a puzzle. I guess you have to figure out which thing to look at. But it's very interaction light, and I think they could do a similar thing of just exploring the space, and certainly the audio is good, and the environment is kind of creepy, and they do some creepy things. Mostly it's the audio. Is atmosphere enough to carry a horror game? And previously I probably would have said no. I felt that horror games needed some teeth. They needed to show, that there's a real threat. But certainly, the people who really enjoyed the PT demo would probably disagree. I think it's interesting to look at, because to some extent, right, if you add an enemy interaction, then there's a lot of problems associated with that. Some people get stuck on sort of the easiest enemy interactions in the game. You know, maybe they don't know where the sprint button is or whatever, and I didn't realize there was a zoom or something on PT demo, so I got stuck really early on. But I mean, so I'm probably the type of gamer that would get stuck on Neverending Nightmares and not know how to sprint. But I mean, the problem is, you know, once you understand the mechanics, in order to avoid the enemies, and all of our enemies have basically simple behaviors, then it's you know, they lose some of the teeth, and so if you don't have to have enemies that behave mechanically that you have to avoid, then almost that opens up more possibilities as far as well, I don't know if it opens up more possibilities, but it sort of puts you in a different problem space, because now you don't have to come up with these entities that behave in certain rules that the player can avoid. You can just sort of craft an experience, the experience that the player will have. Now, arguably, that may not be the best decision for a long-form game. I mean, although, to be honest, I think I probably spent maybe an hour and a half on the PT demo, and of course I gave up pretty quickly on the last puzzle because I was not getting anywhere with everyone's you know, suggestions of how they did it, and I was watching video walkthroughs and trying to figure it out and failing. But you know, I think it's amazing how much time people have put into the PT demo with, you know, it being what it is, a very short section of hallway and just, you know, about the creepy atmosphere and mood. And you know, I wouldn't say it was like the scariest game ever, or you know, it really got its hooks in me, but I mean, it did create a pretty good mood. You know, I don't think it was as good as like the atmosphere in, like, you know, Silent Hill 2 or Fatal Frame 2 or something like that, but I think it was pretty effective overall. And this is sort of something that I'm thinking along the lines of in future horror games is, you know, make sort of everything one-offs. You know, the interactions with enemies and the setups is make them sort of one-offs and not have, you know, sort of set behavior for the enemy. And this is... Obviously, I haven't decided one way or the other, and certainly I think if you look over the order in which things I've interested in Neverending Nightmares, you know, I switched away from the more mechanically based enemies in some of the first levels we designed, and then I veered towards enemies that are more about creating fright in the player. Rather than, you know, sort of puzzles or challenges to get around. In fact, one of those enemies ended up being, like, too challenging for a lot of people, so then I made it, you know, like, pretty easy because, again, it's more about creating the mood than creating a mechanically, you know, challenging thing to avoid. And so, I mean, I think, you know, ideally I would like to, you know, be able to create all sorts of different encounters, maybe reuse the same character, but have it used in different ways to frighten the player. Just because anytime there's an enemy, you know, that enemy has a set of behaviors, you understand that behaviors, it's less scary. And I mean, to some extent, there's been that criticism of the enemies, you know, that are more mechanically based or appear more often. And you know, I think there's an element of truth to that. I mean, certainly I'm okay with it. I think they're interesting enough. And I mean, you know, we do want to have some sort of threat, some sort of fights, you know, things you have to avoid. So I mean, I'm not saying I'm going to go change it now, but I think in an ideal world, everything would sort of be one-offs, and you'd have these different sort of scare situations, and it would almost be more scripted, less sort of emergent, and uh, you know, potentially scarier. The only thing is, it's potentially more work to create, this sort of one-off scare situations. But then again, I mean, if you look at PT Demo, they have a very small amount of content. But I think part of what I think works so well about the PT Demo is just the level of graphical fidelity. I mean, certainly I think it's difficult for indies to compete on graphics, and so that's why we're sort of trying to take a different approach and have sort of a storybook sort of look, just because no one else is doing it. We don't have to compete with anyone else, but I think, one of the things about the PT Demo that really works is that you feel like you're in this hallway, and I'm not sure if we could do the same thing, with our art style, and I mean, certainly we do plenty of things, to create immersion, sense of presence, and all that stuff, but I'm not sure if we could be quite effective, like trying to recreate the PT Demo, in the style of Neverending Nightmares. So it's something interesting to think about, and certainly something I like to ask the audience is, how important is the interaction to you in a horror game? Do you want to avoid enemies? Do you want to fight enemies? Do you want to solve puzzles, or are you just along for the ride? Because I think, the PT Demo is appealing to people who just want to experience the world, and I mean, certainly Neverending Nightmares, I would say, is almost more similar to the PT Demo than something like Resident Evil. Resident Evil has combat and has inventories and these puzzles and stuff, and so I think more and more, in the PT Demo, where it's trying to create immersion and get you into this atmosphere, which is not to say that, PT Demo or Neverending Nightmares is better than Resident Evil. It's just a different approach to horror. So I don't know, just something to think about, and it's certainly interesting to read all the positive coverage of the PT Demo, including, I think, was on Polygon, that basically the opinion piece said that it's probably going to be better than the next Silent Hills. So certainly we'll see, but I do think it's interesting to think about what role, how much agency do you want in a horror game. And certainly in horror games, disempowering the player, you don't usually have less power to control things in a horror game than other genres. But I mean, certainly within the horror genre, there are degrees, and it's interesting to think about like what the right balance is. So, anyway, thanks for watching.